Hi, and welcome to Time Equation, YouTube channel of a watch collecting aficionado. On it, I talk about watches and I showcase my personal collection. Today, we're talking about excitement and patience. I've gotten into watch collecting as a hobby sometime mid-2018, and therefore, the very first Baselworld I could have possibly followed with excitement happened the very next year. Having nothing but Breitling watches in my collection at the time, I was looking forward to seeing what they would come up with next. And they certainly did not disappoint. Among the new models they've unveiled, I found not one, but two models that I really liked. So I did something that's quite atypical for me. I pre-ordered two watches at the same time without even trying them on. The hype and the prospect of new models got the better of me, and I basically rushed to my AD to get the order in. So the very first week after the Baselworld ended, I was already waiting on two Breitling Navitimers to come my way. Little did I know that actually getting them would take more than just a few weeks. That's where the patience comes in, or better said, lack of it. While waiting for these watches to arrive, I managed to expand my collection quite a bit. In fact, before the first Navitimer came in, my collection grew by 3 pieces. I've gotten the Rolex Skydweller, Omega Speedmaster Dark Side of the Moon Apollo 8 edition, and the Breitling Avenger Bandit, all in the 9 months it took for the first part of the order to be fulfilled. And for the second, it would have taken a few months more and 2 more watches. In total, it took almost a full year for these 2 watches to be built. But the wait was well worth it, because the very first watch from that pre-order was this Breitling Navitimer, reference 806, a faithful re-edition of the 1959 original. The team that worked on bringing this late 50s Navitimer back to life paid attention to minute details that made the original an iconic pilot's chronograph. Most of it has been recreated as close as possible. The case dimensions are identical to the original, as is the dial, the sub-register layout, and the syringe-style hands. Even the number of beads on the bezel, 94, is perfectly matched. As for the differences, there are just a few. Biggest one, of course, is the movement. While still a manually wound one, the watch is no longer using the original Venus 178 caliber. That has been upgraded to the modern B09 caliber instead. Caliber that is a variant of the in-house automatic B01 movement Breitling uses for its re-editions. And due to the differences in the movement, the chronograph pushers are just slightly longer on the re-edition, which, unless you were looking at the two side by side, is something you'd probably miss. The lume coating on both the hands and the dial has also been upgraded to superluminova. However, its color was made to resemble the aged look of the original luminescent material. And it has also been hand applied to give it that extra touch in reviving the original. Finally, the water resistance has been improved to the modern Navitimer 30 meters. But for all intents and purposes, the 806 re-edition is the vintage model remade, and those that have it can enjoy wearing a piece of the past on their wrist, without the quirks that such an old watch would normally have, and with a chance for this new watch to start recording history alongside its first wearer. Reference 806 is a numbered limited edition. This one, made in steel, is limited to just 1959 pieces. Number chosen to celebrate the year in which its namesake came out. Being limited is why I was so quick to place in my pre-order. I simply did not want to miss out on having this amazing watch in my collection. This Navitimer is just a beautiful example of an ultimate pilot tool watch. It sits comfortably on the wrist with its 41mm case diameter and the 22mm lug width. Its lugs have been curved a bit more than the current Navitimer collection, and since the 806 sits lower, the lugs help the watch wear better on a smaller wrist. It is funny to think that in the late 50s, its diameter would have placed it on the upper end of the diameter spectrum, and that now it is considered normal sized by most wristwatch aficionados out there. Ironically, in the Breitling catalog, it is now on the opposite end of the same spectrum, being one of the smaller pieces the watch company offers. Though, the times are changing in the house of Breitling, and the newer models keep being made more approachable to those with slender wrists. The case itself is brushed, or satin finished, for the most part. It's only the lugs and the case back that are executed in high polish. which is very appropriate for a tool watch such as itself. Satin surfaces hide scratches a bit better than the polished ones. While the case itself is slim, the height of the watch is slightly increased by the highly domed plexiglass crystal, which was chosen instead of the sapphire to keep the authentic vintage look. It has no anti-reflective coating for the very same reason. This might be a deal breaker for some. Since plexiglass scratches easily, and sapphire does not, the crystal will accumulate some wear and tear over time, and it will likely need polish or replacing in the future. But those that seek to own a piece of the past will welcome this attention to detail, even though the modern materials would clearly offer superior legibility and durability. And while the glare can make you look twice at the watch to read the time, the dial on this watch doesn't disappoint. In fact, the high contrast between the black dial and the white syringe hands makes AR coating absence a non-issue during everyday use. 806 is intended to be pilot tool watch after all. Reading the time, timing things, and doing flight calculations at 10,000 feet is what this watch does. Yes, this watch does math as well. Both multiplication and division can be done with its beaded slide rule bezel, which does way more than just simple math. As a pilot watch, it can also do things like fuel consumption and rate of descent calculations. And for us non-flyer folks, it can do three-way multiplication, which is handy for calculating a tip at the restaurant or doing currency conversions. I've certainly used it like that more than once. With just a few minutes invested to master its use, you can enjoy a bit of help when you don't want to bother with doing the math in your head. And that's certainly going to turn a few heads and pose some questions. But that's the part of the fun of owning such a watch. The dial, although packed full with numbers, is still incredibly legible. Arabic numerals it uses to emphasize the hours are all hand-painted with luminous material. They simply pop and guide the eyes to make time reading easy. But there's more information to be found on the dial than just the time. The white, most outer ring is a slide rule. Its numbers are mirrored on the most outer ring of the black dial. When those two are aligned, they can be used to do various calculations, multiplication and division being the simplest to master. Moving inward, towards the dial center, we find the second ring. This graduated track converts time in minutes into hours. With it, for example, you can convert 70 minutes into 1 hour and 10 minutes. And then there's the innermost ring, which is a standard minute track. It overlaps with the very tip of the minute hand. From it, you can read both the minutes and the chronograph seconds when the chronograph is engaged. Speaking of which, there are 3 subdial registers on the face of the watch, running seconds at the 9 o'clock and the 2 chronograph totalizers at the 3 and the 6. Chronograph minutes are at the 3 o'clock position and the chronograph hours are at the 6, meaning that this chronograph can measure events up to 12 hours in length, which is quite handy for long distance flying. And in case you're wondering why the chronograph minutes 3, 6, and 9 are made more prominent than the others, the answer is pilots again. In the States, where this model first came out, payphones would charge long-distance calls in 3-minute intervals. With prominent minutes, pilots could time the calls they are making and just maybe save some money doing so. Or so the story behind these elongated minute markers goes. This feature didn't persist through the current era of Navitimers, as nowadays payphone calls are a thing of the past. There's no real use for it anymore, and therefore no reason to make the dial look asymmetrical. Finally, at the very top of the dial, there's the brand name and the gold wings logo. Below it, the word Navitimer alleviates any doubt when it comes to the model you're wearing. On the other end of the watch, the case is both polished and satin finished. Not a lot of writing on the case back. It is faithful to the original after all. But since this is a numbered edition, there you can find the number of your piece. As you can see, I got lucky. Even though this was a pre-order, the number I got was still very high. That might mean that I placed the order just in time to be lucky enough to get one. As far as I can tell, these were sold out almost immediately. Should you find yourself in a position to get one that is brand new, and you have doubts that you could postpone the purchase, don't. Just go for it. They aren't making any more of these. Inside the steel case is a manually wound B09 movement. Like the B01, on which it is based, it operates at 28,800 vibrations per hour. Both are vertical clutch column wheel chronographs that offer a tactile feeling of actuation. Their power reserves are also identical, and both run approximately 70 hours after being fully wound. The number of joules is lesser, there's 39 of them in the B09, and obviously the B09 doesn't have a rotor mass, and you should therefore wind it every day or so for it to keep ticking. This Navitimer keeps good time, and it is on average late around 2 seconds per day, which is well within COSC standards of operation. Though I'd prefer for it to run fast and not slow, it doesn't really bother me. Being manually wound, you have to wind it every day or so anyway. It is easy enough to adjust it while doing so. The strap is made out of cow skin. It is thick and takes a bit of time to break in. It took a week or so for it to mold to my wrist, and now it wears quite comfortably. There's some white stitching on both ends of the strap for aesthetics and a bit of bolstering. The strap is also broader at the top, 22mm, and at the buckle it is just 18mm wide. The buckle itself is both polished and satin finished, and it is also signed. Navitimer is without a doubt my favorite watch. That's why I keep coming back to it and why I've collected so many of them. Its design and utility functions simply speak to me. And while I'm not a pilot myself, I do appreciate the watch that was built to be used as a flight instrument. The idea that a small analog wrist computer, such as this one, could have made a difference in the air is astonishing to me. Especially the 806 model, a faithful remake of the 1950s original. When I look down my wrist, that is exactly what I see. A piece of the past made new again. And if the first Navitimer I got for myself didn't also have sentimental value, this could have easily been my favorite watch ever. I enjoy wearing it, and it is definitely more on my wrist than any other piece I have in my collection. Following this Navitimer, my collection grew rather quickly. Every few months I'd buy a new watch that was different from the last. Today, my collection stands at a dozen pieces, each with its own story and a set of quirks. I invite you to follow my watch collecting journey by subscribing to my channel. That way you'll get notified and discover the watch I've chosen next. Until then.